In a galaxy regulated by an implicit hierarchy, a universal fact prevailed: the top bounty hunters dominated the stars. They traversed planets with confidence, instilling dread in criminals and earning admiration from residents. No corner of the galaxy was untouched. Evade their grasp, and no outlaw had a chance. Once designated for apprehension by these formidable hunters, Earth has perpetually been a trivial, inconsequential realm where outlaws are feeble and disorganized, scarcely deserving of attention. The endeavors of intergalactic bounty hunters regarded Earth's criminals as regressive, primitive, and facile targets. A group of bounty hunters congregated at a lit table in a spaceport cantina. Their discussions replete with tales of they laughed at the inflated tales of Earth's outlaws, reflecting on earlier wins and the ineptitude of Earth's crooks. Gangs likened to innocuous vermin deemed unworthy of their attention. They scoffed at how they might manage the entirety of a city's criminals without exerting much effort in the universe extensive, and there existed larger, more perilous bounties to pursue. Earth was at the lowest position on their list, is occupied by Hunter, a massive being with dense, armored skin reclined in his chair. His resonant voice resonated with amusement as he narrated it during a recent expedition to Earth. These individuals perceived themselves as formidable. However, they scarcely possessed the proficiency to use a blaster, he derided while shaking his head. I had a contingent of 10 Earth outlaws capitulate without resistance, which elicited derision from the rest. They raised their glasses in consensus. However, amidst the hilarity, there was a momentary hesitation. Hunter, a seasoned veteran with numerous successful captures, lowered his drink and surveyed the table. He murmured about the Gunslinger upon hearing the name. Silence. The company momentarily. Some adjusted in their chairs while others ignored it with a gesture, regarding it as merely another occurrence. One hunter from Earth legend scoffed, shaking his head at their fantastical tales of Cabus. Outlaws are sometimes portrayed as mythical figures to enhance the perception of their danger, although the seasoned hunter was not easily amused. I have heard numerous rumors regarding him. He has reportedly eliminated several bounty hunters with remarkable speed. He never leaves a trace. Some assert he does not lament the others. Eyes reluctant to accept that an Earth outlaw could be a genuine threat, yet in the recesses of their thoughts, a lingering doubt persisted. The narratives appeared to linger, although no one was prepared to acknowledge it openly. Earth remained a realm of facile targets and inconsequential offenders. Their hubris served as their protection. They considered themselves as invulnerable in their advanced suits and equipped with high-tech weaponry. Earth was to them but a primitive planet inhabited by primitive beings who had no cause to believe otherwise. They completed their beverages and transitioned to their subsequent discussion, smiling about their forthcoming effortless financial gain. However, rumors persisted. As they often have a propensity to proliferate on Earth, in the desolate, lawless towns in the realm governed by outlaws, the name of the Gunslinger was uttered in whispers. Little was known about him, save for the fact that when the situation became critical, he appeared without anyone knowing his origin. No one knew his whereabouts. All they understood was that upon his arrival, the tide of battle switched against those who opposed him. He seldom departed, the interstellar bounty hunter unaware of their actual nature. Next, target has once again focused on Earth, as a new bounty has been issued. In a little lonely village on the planet, a bunch of outlaws was raising trouble while the bounty hunters laughed at them. Prepped their vessel, anticipating that this would be yet another uncomplicated mission. Another narrative to augment their compilation of Earth's exploits. Weaknesses. As soon as they arrived on Earth, the dust cloud enveloped them, merging with the unsettling silence of. The town's structures were dilapidated and fissured, indicative of years of neglect. The remaining townspeople observed from behind closed shutters, fear imprinted on their features as the bounty hunters approached. Disembarked from their vessel, weapons in hand, their confidence apparent in each stride. As they traversed the desolate streets, they remained oblivious to the eyes observing them from the shadows. Did not perceive the palpable tension in the atmosphere as the town appeared to hold its breath while the bounty hunters dispersed, summoning the outlaws they intended to apprehend. Anticipating opposition, they were instead confronted with the bounty hunters apprehended the first outlaw. Without resistance, the second was subdued with equal ease. They exchanged smirks, reaffirming their belief that Earth posed no threat. Nonetheless, something felt amiss. An unacknowledged, unspoken warning permeated the atmosphere as they ventured further into the settlement of the whispers. As the sound of the Gunslinger approached, a voice murmured, "He's coming." Behind a closed door, the Gunslinger prevents outsiders from gaining control. Bounty hunters regarded the statements as mere local superstition, having seen similar tales previously. The numerous universes previously depicted have consistently been overblown and untrue. Whispers circulated the name of the gunslinger was on every tongue, although no one appeared to know his whereabouts or the time of his presence. The bounty hunters seemed to disregard the escalating tension, assured that their guns and experience would be more than sufficient to confront any challenge that Earth could present. However, as they traversed the town documenting as the outlaws proliferated and became increasingly comfortable, a shadow began to cast over them. Unbeknownst to them, the true pursuit was imminent. The gunslinger was lurking, observing, and poised for the initial move. At a pivotal moment in their lives, the bounty hunters were on the verge of confronting an unforeseen obstacle, one for which they had not adequately prepared, linked to the legend they had encountered. They ridiculed the gunslinger, whom they had underestimated, yet he proved to be far more formidable than they had ever envisioned, surpassing the capabilities of the bounty hunters. Traversed the arid streets, their armored boots crunching on the parched earth, their laughter extinguished. Replaced by a palpable silence, they could not dispel the sensation of being observed. It was subtle yet pervasive. A flicker of movement appeared in the distance, a shadow that remained just beyond seeing they had been on plenty of. Previous missions encountered various perils, although there was an inexplicable quality about this location that felt distinct. As they ventured into the core of the town's buildings were aged and cracked from years of neglect. The air was thick with dust, and the only sound was the faint creak of a rusted weather vane spun in the wind as the inhabitants retreated into their homes. The bounty hunters, with their hands resting on their rifles, stretched out, leaving the streets desolate as their confidence gradually increased. A faraway gunshot reverberated through the stillness, slicing through the silence like a sword. The commander of a tall person in sleek black armor raised a hand to halt the group. "That did not resemble one of ours," he mumbled, as another gunfire reverberated nearby. Subsequently, a hefty object struck the ground, prompting the hunters to exchange glances. Expressions transitioning from hubristic assurance to disquieted fatigue, they dispersed to broaden their coverage. One of the hunters, a massive muscular monster with a blaster weapon slung across his back, advanced towards his footsteps were heavy, the armor clinking with each movement. Upon turning a corner, he observed a guy prone in the mud. It was one of the outlaws they had apprehended earlier. Now devoid of life, a solitary bullet hole was precisely positioned between the man's eyes. The hunter scowled, bending to examine the body. The shot was accurate. The professional who captured the image have a clear understanding of their craft beforehand. The hunter might respond to a faint click that resonated from behind him. He turned only to observe a silhouette positioned in the shadows, scarcely discernible, illuminated by a solitary flash of light. Subsequently, darkness. The hunter fell to the ground, his armor smoldering from the precise shot that had penetrated it. The head of the group received a warning regarding a susceptible gap in the plating located at the center of town. The soldiers had been silent. He muttered a curse, signaling the others to reconvene. "We have a predicament," he snarled. "Someone is eliminating us." The hunters are encroaching. Their movements became more careful, with eyes examining every shadow. From the rooftop, another shot was fired, resulting in the fall of yet another hunter. A brief whisper of movement ensued, followed by silence as the remaining hunters clustered together, their swagger diminished. The individual pursuing them was moving rapidly, too swiftly for them to discern a single visage. The leader, his voice tense, screamed commands after having only caught a quick glance of the figure in the shadows. We must elicit his response with frustration, utilizing the outlaws as bait if necessary. However, prior to the execution of their plan, the ground beneath them shifted, resulting in a cloud of dust erupting from a little explosion. Explosions occurred near their feet, compelling them to disperse. The gunslinger had established traps, guiding them precisely to his desired location amidst the turmoil. Another hunter was eliminated. With a swift and effective shot, the remaining bounty hunters were reduced to half their initial count. Unyielding confidence supplanted by sheer terror, they had not even glimpsed their assailant's visage. The gunslinger was a phantom emerged from the shadows and vanished before any response could be elicited. An onset of panic ensued. They had misjudged Earth and the gunslinger, dismissing the narratives as inconsequential. The local legends were proving to be alarmingly genuine. The leader of the gang tightened his teeth, his mind racing. We need. He commanded a retreat to regroup at the ship, acknowledging our unpreparedness for the situation. They executed their retreat, while the gunslinger maintained relentless pursuit, navigating the town with silent precision by utilizing the terrain. Every measure taken by the bounty hunters was meticulously designed to his advantage. Guiding them farther into his snare, the previously vacant streets suddenly resembled a labyrinth. Each round was a possible ambush. One by one, the bounty hunters succumbed to their superior tactics. Technology proved ineffective against the gunslinger's relentless onslaught. He did not depend on sheer strength, or excessive firepower was unnecessary. His techniques were straightforward yet effective. Exposing the vulnerabilities in their advanced armor by utilizing the environment to outmaneuver them, at every opportunity the leader arrived at the outskirts of the town. Solitary, his crew, formerly the preeminent bounty hunters in the galaxy, had disbanded. Reduced to mere casualties, his heart raced in his chest as he surveyed the horizon, seeking any signs. There was no indication of the gunslinger, no movement, no sound. The leader's hold on his weapon intensified. He was resolute in not succumbing without a struggle. He had encountered perilous criminals previously, but this situation was distinct. The gunslinger was not merely an outlaw, he was something more. Alternatively, something significantly more perilous. He inhaled deeply, stabilizing his aim. He whispered under his breath, "Come on, show yourself," but the gunslinger remained concealed. He adhered to no one's rules but his own. Rather than exposing himself, he attacked from behind, and the leader experienced the sudden pain. The bullet grazed his armor, causing him to lose his balance as he whirled, discharging erratically into the void, although his rounds yielded nothing but dust. And then, as abruptly as it commenced, the assault ceased. The commander remained solitary, breathing heavily, with his weapon in hand. He raised his weapon, but there was no indication of his adversary. The gunslinger had vanished, leaving only the corpses of the vanquished hunters and the resonance of their defeat. For the first time in his career, the head of the bounty hunters had the pang of failure. He had scoffed at the narratives, not the concept that an Earth outlaw posed a potential threat yet. Now, among the devastation of his crew, he recognized the extent of his error. The remaining bounty hunters reassembled, their prior arrogance dismantled and supplanted with terror with each stride they took. Every sound around them was amplified, and they advanced warily, weapons in hand, feeling the weight of the atmosphere. Anticipating an imminent assault, they had relinquished control. Transformed into the prey, each individual scrutinized the streets, rooftops, and shadows, yet no indication of the gunslinger was present. Tension permeated the atmosphere like a dense cloud. The leader tightened his jaw, his mind swiftly evaluating potential methods. Technology had consistently provided them with an advantage. However, against this adversary, their advanced scanners appeared ineffectual. Detected no activity, no thermal signs, as though the gunslinger were he was not engaging on their terms. He was selecting the time and place of his attacks. Compelled into uncharted terrain, they navigated the desolate streets, remaining close and utilizing any available concealment. The town itself seems to conspire against them in every alley. Each structure represented a possible ambush site, and the gunslinger was very aware of this. He possessed the advantage, and they recognized it. The leader's fury intensified with each passing minute. His soldiers were among the finest in the galaxy, yet here they found themselves, surpassed by a single individual. Another gun abruptly echoed, and one of the hunters collapsed to the ground. His armor penetrated with surgical precision. The others dispersed, seeking refuge behind cover. The onslaught had concluded. The gunslinger moved with remarkable speed and silence, each shot precise. It was a declaration reminding them of their inferiority. The leader's grip on his weapon intensified. His heart raced. With a thumping heart, their strategies shifted. They could not risk engagement. They could no longer engage him on his terms. They sought to elicit a frontal confrontation. In anticipation of confrontation, the leader commanded his soldiers to assume defensive positions, establish traps, and create a perimeter. A desperate maneuver, yet it was their sole option. They required a means to alter the course and compel the gunslinger to disclose. He realized they could not continue to lose men in this manner, yet the gunslinger remained unfazed. He was calm and meticulous, enduring for hours. As time elapsed, the suspense intensified. Each minute felt interminable as the bounty seekers awaited his decision. Instead of assaulting, the gunslinger remained concealed, observing. As he waited, he recognized their desperation intensified with each instant. One of the hunters increasingly agitated. The quiet pierced the shadows, his anxieties overwhelming him. His shots were ineffective, yet sufficient to induce a state of paranoia inside the group that they were unable to withstand the strain. The leader clenched his jaw, issuing commands to maintain order. However, it was evident that the gunslinger strategies were effective. He did not need to dismantle them individually, he allowed them to self-destruct. Ultimately, Belita comprehended this. They could not prevail in this conflict under Earth's conditions. They needed to abort their mission, regroup, rethink, and retreat. To the ship he controlled, his voice strained yet resolute. "We are withdrawing, but..." As they commenced their retreat, the ground under them erupted into mayhem. The gunslinger had foreseen their maneuver. A succession of minor explosions shook the streets, obstructing their escape route, while the leader muttered a curse under his breath. Realizing too late that the gunslinger had been manipulating them from the first, he had not been concealing himself. They have been directing them into a trap, and now they are ensnared. Bounty hunters attempted to battle their way through, but it was futile. The gunslinger attacked again, his rounds accurate and lethal, eliminating them as they sought refuge. The leader, now among the few survivors, recognized this reality. Ultimately, he sensed the burden of failure pressing upon him. His squad, once the most formidable hunters in the galaxy, had been diminished to insignificance by a solitary individual on a remote planet. He had underestimated Earth, and now he was facing the consequences. His weapon felt burdensome. For the first time in his life, he felt uncertain of his ability to prevail. Amidst the tumult, he glimpsed the gunslinger, a shadow traversing the dust and rubble too swiftly for him to focus on. He fired blindly, desperation overwhelming him. Yet the gunslinger remained steadfast. Another shot was fired, and the commander experienced a piercing pain in his leg, causing him to collapse to the ground as his armor failed. Once more, he attempted to elevate himself, but his power was dissipated. The gunslinger approached with slow and methodical footsteps, devoid of urgency. His motions were victorious. There was no need for gloating, as he was merely completing what he had initiated. The commander raised his gaze. Vision blurred from pain and tiredness. He never anticipated it would conclude in this manner. He had confronted some of the most formidable challenges, perilous offenders in the galaxy, yet nothing had equipped him for this. As the gunslinger loomed over him, the commander recognized the futility of resistance, having conceded defeat, and accepted his fate. Loosened his hold on the rifle and closed his eyes, anticipating the inevitable, but the final shot did not arrive. Instead, the gunslinger turned and departed, leaving the leader to his destiny. It was not about murdering, it was about conveying a message. The leader observed in bewilderment as the gunslinger vanished. In the distance, he was not merely an outlaw, he represented something even more perilous, an idea, a force that could not be contained. The commander realized too late that Earth had its defender, unable to be vanquished by technology or raw might. The galaxy would soon come to dread him, as the bounty hunters had been defeated. The numbers diminished to nearly none. Those that survived were battered, staggering back towards their vessel, their once proud armor in tatters. Impaired and ineffective against the gunslinger's relentless precision, the few remaining individuals scarcely articulated their hubris. Removed, leaving alone the primal fear that had entrenched itself deep into their bones. They had underestimated him, and now all that remained was the acrid sting of loss. With the commander still nursing the injured in his leg, he surveyed the surviving men. They were unfit to continue the battle. Their equipment was compromised. Technology was irrelevant. The gunslinger had dismantled them solely through skill and instinct. It was evident that this conflict had never centered on greater equipment, or enhanced training rather. It had been about the gunslinger had excelled in survival much beyond any of them, as the leader's mind raced while they huddled around, collaboratively devising a fresh strategy. Their vessel was near yet not sufficiently proximate. They were unable to leave the village without being revealed, and the gunslinger remained vigilant in observation. Anticipating their errors, each move they took seemed to lead them directly into his crosshairs. The ship now seemed like a distant dream, just out of reach, when suddenly a sound emanated from the far end of the street, sparked a wave of tension within the group, prompting them to pivot with weapons drawn. The street was deserted, with only the wind or perhaps another trap that the gunslinger did not require. To disclose his presence and maintain their anxiety, he had enough instilled fear of every shadow and every corner they encountered. Reduced to a precondition, the gunslinger became the predator. The leader muttered curses under his breath, the pain in his legs impeding his movement. He restrained himself as they progressed. He could not exhibit vulnerability, not at this moment, not while they were so close. On the verge of escaping this ordeal, he urged the others, his voice deliberate yet unwavering, "We must continue." He articulated his thoughts, while internally he harbored doubts about the veracity of his own assertions. The gunslinger had been manipulating them, directing them according to his desires. It was merely a question of time before he executed his ultimate strategy. As they approached the town's periphery, the company halted to survey the region ahead. There, in the open, was the final expanse. There was no cover or means of concealment between them and their ship. The leader was aware of this. Implied that if they attempted to flee, the gunslinger would eliminate them before they reached the midpoint, whereas remaining in place it was not a viable alternative. They were unable to outlast him, as he had demonstrated repeatedly. The leader assessed his alternatives, his thoughts assessing the risks, but before he could reach a conclusion, one of the remaining hunters, overcome by a sudden surge of terror and despair, the hunter dashed towards the ship, separating from the group. The others called out to him, but it was too late. The hunter's footsteps resonated loudly in the silent street. Each one the gunslinger aimed, and in an instant, a single shot was fired clean and perfect. The hunter dropped mid-stride, his body sliding to a halt in the ground. The remaining group did not need to observe to ascertain what had transpired. The gunslinger had struck once more, and they were now diminished. With only two options, the leader's heart raced in his chest. He had no alternative. Unable to delay more, he inhaled deeply and signaled to the final hunter beside him, indicating that they would proceed together immediately. The two individuals rushed towards the ship, their feet striking the earth as the vessel approached nearer. His leg throbbed with anguish, yet he persevered, his thoughts fixated on one objective. The hunter beside him collapsed from a precise shot into his chest as another gunshot rang out. He could not stop. The ship was merely a few feet away. He had to succeed, but as he approached the open hatch, he experienced a sensation. A searing pain in his shoulder caused him to stagger, grasping the edge of. The ship was struck by the bullet's force, nearly unbalancing him. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself inside, shutting the door. He placed his palm on the control panel to close the hatch behind him, and the doors sealed shut with a hiss. For the first time in hours, he experienced a fleeting sense of relief, having barely succeeded. However, he had successfully entered the ship. The hush was overwhelming as the leader leaned in. Against the wall, he breathed heavily, his shoulder gushing from the fresh wound. He peered through the small window, partly anticipating the gunslinger observing him, but the street was empty. For a few while, the leader permitted himself to breathe, his head still reeling from recent events. His team's failure resulted in the complete obliteration of his reputation. He had failed, and Earth was lost. The Outlaws were expected to be inferior, although the gunslinger demonstrated that this was not the case. No matter how advanced their technology or how skillful they believed themselves to be, there was always someone superior. The ship's engines activated as the leader readied to depart from the planet. He could no longer remain here. The mission failed, yet his life was not worth sacrificing for it, as the vessel. As he ascended, Bader gazed down at the town, his mind whirling with thoughts. The tale of the Gunslinger would permeate the galaxy, becoming the legend of the man who had decimated an entire team of expert hunters, devoid of scorn or mockery. This time, the bounty the hunters had ridiculed Earth outlaw, but the Gunslinger transformed the situation entirely. Consequently, no one would ever again misjudge Earth when the ship penetrated its atmosphere, departing from the barren landscape. The town receded as it ascended into the frigid expanse of space. The leader injured and alone, he sat in the cockpit, his hands firmly grasping the controls. The agony in his shoulder was excruciating, yet he persisted. He disregarded it. His thoughts were preoccupied, recreating every moment of the past few days, every error, every misstep. The bounty hunters arrived on Earth with the presumption of an effortless triumph, yet they were dismantled by a single individual. The legend they had dismissed until it was too late. He looked at the vacant seats behind him where his squad had been. They ought to have been among the finest hunters in the galaxy, elite in every respect. Instead, the Gunslinger had prevailed. The leader understood that their defeat would rapidly disseminate, having subdued them solely by skill and guile. Other bounty hunters throughout the galaxy would learn about the events that transpired on Earth, and there would be no collaboratively devising a fresh strategy. Their vessel was near yet not sufficiently proximate. They were unable to leave the village without being revealed, and the Gunslinger remained vigilant in observation. Anticipating their errors, each move they took seemed to lead them directly into his crosshairs. The ship now seemed like a distant dream, just out of reach, when suddenly a sound emanated from the far end of the street, sparked a wave of tension within the group, prompting them to pivot with weapons drawn. The street was deserted, with only the wind or perhaps another trap that the Gunslinger did not require. To disclose his presence and maintain their anxiety, He had enough instilled fear of every shadow in every corner they encountered. Concealing the thought, he acknowledged that his previously unassailable reputation was now compromised. In ruins, no one would fear him any longer. He had been defeated by an Earth outlaw. He had regarded the man as only a myth, scoffing at the warnings and tales, and now he found himself confronted with the reality. He paid the price. There was no evading the truth. He had failed as the ship ascended. As the leader examined the stars, his thoughts reverted to the gunslinger. How had he accomplished it? How had a single individual outwitted and the entire crew of seasoned hunters emphasized that proficiency with a weapon was not the sole criterion? The gunslinger possessed an elusive quality that none of them comprehended until it was too late. As though he had anticipated their actions with precision, as if he were engaged in a game of which they were entirely unaware, conscious of the leader's hand quivering slightly as he extended towards the ship's navigation controls, he was compelled to report. He needed to elucidate the events that transpired. But what could he articulate that would suffice alone? Outlaw. A solitary individual from Earth had completely demolished their entire enterprise. It seemed unbelievable without witnessing it firsthand. Themselves in ruins, yet they would need to accept it. The evidence was unequivocal. The gunslinger's reputation would only increase from this point as he charted a path for a remote space station, one among several centers where bounty hunters congregated to exchange intelligence, acquire rewards, and recount experiences. He dreaded the conversation that awaited him there would involve inquiries and demands from the other hunters. Answers regarding how a collective of the galaxy's elite was subdued by a solitary individual. There would be no satisfactory explanation for the events that transpired as the ship approached space. The leader inhaled deeply, preparing himself for the unavoidable. His pride had been destroyed, yet he could not evade the reality he must confront. Upon docking the ship, he disembarked, his damaged leg and shoulder causing him discomfort, much as his soldiers had confronted the gunslinger. As I advanced, the station's lights flickered above, forming elongated shadows. Upon entering, he observed the individuals present, their gazes directed towards him across the frigid metallic floor. They heard that something had gone awry, but they were unaware of the entire degree their gaze trailed him as he proceeded to the room's center, became enveloped in a profound quiet until one of the elders eventually spoke. A weathered hunter, his face marked by scars, advanced. He inquired, his voice subdued and wary, as the leader swallowed hard. He had to select his words meticulously, although there was no merit in embellishing the truth. "The reality is that the mission failed," he stated, his voice just above a whisper. "We were." Outsmarted and outgunned, the chamber remained silent as the other hunters awaited. They required a deeper comprehension of the gunslinger, who eliminated us individually. A murmur circulated across the group, incredulity apparent in their expressions. The leader prepared himself for their reactions. Others would deride him, while some would request evidence, yet all would recognize that circumstances had transformed Earth was no longer the uncomplicated place it once was. The goal they had all perceived, and the gunslinger was no longer merely a narrative conveyed in the shadows, as the leader recounted the events with excruciating precision, reflecting the atmosphere in the room shifted. No one interrupted him, no one laughed. They listened, and as they did, the gravity of the situation became apparent. The gunslinger was not merely an outlaw, but a formidable force. Being a guardian of Earth in unforeseen manners, his name would proliferate throughout the galaxy. Bounty hunters would reconsider their decision to return to Earth by that time. Upon concluding his narrative, the room was permeated with a subdued, uneasy reverence. They all understood the truth. Earth was not the farce they had previously perceived, and the gunslinger had demonstrated that beyond. Despite any uncertainty, the leader remained steadfast, his body weary yet his pride unblemished. However, he understood that this was merely the inception. The tale of the gunslinger would expand, along with Earth's. The leader departed the station, irrevocably altering their reputation. On his ship, he pondered the potential outcomes, as the galaxy harbored numerous perilous locations that instilled terror in people. Figures, yet now Earth possessed its own. The bounty hunters had previously derided Earth's outlaws, but no one would be. The gunslinger had ensured that laughter was no longer present, and amid the silence of space as the leadership departed from the station, the reverberations of the gunslinger's narrative commenced to disseminate, murmured from one planet to another, transported by individuals who had observed the impossible.